The 5 craziest rescues of the Middle Ages. Although in medieval movies, battles usually end with the slaughter of the defeated, the truth is that this was not always the case. When a king or nobleman of some importance was defeated, the victor had other options available to him. It was much more profitable, for example, to keep the prisoner alive and ask a heavy ransom for him, and that was a very common practice throughout the Middle Ages. While it's true that one's fate ultimately depended on the chivalrous courtesy of the victor, it should also be noted that over time a series of treaties developed that stipulated the treatment of the vanquished. These essays proliferated, especially at the end of the Middle Ages, during the 14th century, due to the incredible number of wars that took place in that century. Today, we review the 5 craziest rescues of the Middle Ages. Through them, the defeated managed to save their lives, but at what a price? The top 5 is the case of King John II of France. John was the second monarch of the House of Valois and had the misfortune of being French in the middle of the 14th century. Given at that time, England was experiencing one of its strongest moments during the 100 Years' War, which pitted the crowns of France and England against each other. Nevertheless, John showed courage to command his men on the battlefield, which earned him the nickname The Good. However, John II's bravery was enough to defeat the English, who were under the intelligent command of Edward III, the fearsome Black Prince. Thus, in the Battle of Poitiers, in 1356, Edward achieved a crushing victory over the French and John II himself was taken prisoner, as the chronicles relate. A great tumult and a great fight took place around King John because of the greed to seize him, and those who knew him and were closest to him shouted at him, "Surrender, surrender, otherwise you are dead." John II was released on condition that he paid a whopping 3 million escudos of gold. In addition, and as a guarantee of payment, the English held King John's 2 sons in London, but it was clearly impossible for the monarch to pay the amount demanded for their ransom, a problem that was compounded by the escape from London of one of his hostage sons, which infuriated the English. Then John decided to save the only thing he had left, his honour. He surrendered again to the English in 1364 and would never return to his kingdom, meeting his death in prison. Top 4 on the list goes to one of the most famous Crusader kings, Guy of Lusignan. An outstanding French nobleman of the 12th century, Guy reached his most glorious moment when Sibylla, the Queen of Jerusalem, chose him as her husband, making him king of the dreamed kingdom of Jerusalem. The year was 1186. However, Guy's golden days were few. For the year after reaching the throne, he had to suffer the fateful defeat of the Huns of Hattin. In that momentous battle, the great Sultan Saladin inflicted on the Crusader army the heaviest of his defeats, and all the Crusader leaders were taken prisoner or executed. Saladin decided to spare Guy's life, but in exchange for a high price, the city of Ashkelon, one of the Christian strongholds in the Holy Land, which also had one of the most important ports on the Palestinian coast. If they accepted, the Christians would receive a heavy blow because Ashkelon would be added to the last territorial losses caused by the Battle of Hattin. Guy surrendered the city to pay his ransom, although it never regained its former power. Jerusalem and the great cities of Palestine had also fallen to Saladin as a result of Hattin, and after the death of Sibylla, other leading Christian nobles tried to wrest the title of King of Jerusalem from him. Guy ended his days as Lord of Cyprus, from where he would support Richard the Lionheart in his famous Third Crusade. We move on to the top 3 of the list of the craziest rescues of the Middle Ages, with one of the most peculiar and legendary monarchs of the 15th century, Alfonso V of Aragon, known as the Wise. Alfonso was the ruler of the Crown of Aragon, a political formation that controlled important territories beyond the Iberian Peninsula, such as Sicily, Majorca, or Sardinia. All this made Alfonso one of the most powerful monarchs of the Mediterranean, but he was ambitious for more, and in love with Italy. He also wanted to conquer the Kingdom of Naples. The opportunity came when Joanna II demanded his military support to defend Naples against the French. Without thinking twice, Alfonso defeated the French, and taking advantage of his victory, tried to seize the island, which led him to be attacked by the Duke of Milan, who finally defeated him in the Battle of Ponza. As a result of this defeat, Alfonso was taken prisoner, along with his brothers. But that was not the worst of it, for while Alfonso was squandering his income in his Neapolitan campaign, Aragon was being attacked by the Castilians. Thus, the Queen and the authorities of Aragon agreed to pay for the king's release and return to Aragon, where he was needed at the head of the army. Thus, in the Assembly of 1435, the Aragonese approved the payment of 220,000 florins to recover their king, the largest subsidy ever paid by the Kingdom of Aragon to a king. Alfonso was thus able to return to Aragon to attend to the affairs of the kingdom. However, as soon as he could, he returned to Naples and achieved his longed-for conquest, establishing his court there. That king, who cost his kingdom so dearly, never returned to Aragon, where he only resided for 28 of the 42 years of his reign. We give way to the top two of our list, since it cannot be for anyone other than the famous and controversial Bertrand du Guesclin, the commander of the White Companies. Bertrand achieved great fame in the 14th century France, finding in the 100 Years' War his best stage of action. Tough, strong, violent, and unscrupulous, he excelled in tournaments as well as on the battlefields, even leading a company of mercenaries when he was still a young man. Bertrand knew how to use guerrilla warfare to confront the invincible English armies, and recovered large territories for the King of France. But it was not in the fields of France that he earned his place on our list, but in Spain. During a truce with England, Bertrand crossed the Pyrenees to fight in the service of Henry of Trastamara, who was disputing the kingdom of Castile from his half-brother Peter I. As Peter I had in turn recruited the English of the Black Prince, Bertrand continued to fight against the English, but instead of doing so in France, he was now fighting in Spain. The decisive battle took place in Nájera in April 1367. Peter I of Castile, with the support of the Black Prince, defeated his enemies. Bertrand, who did not want to fight that day, was taken prisoner, and a heavy ransom was demanded for his release. But the proud du Guesclin found that they were asking for him shameful, and believing himself worthy of a much higher ransom, he himself fixed the amount to be paid for his own freedom. Bertrand demanded from the King of France the astronomical sum of 100,000 francs. In spite of everything, the King of France paid the amount and recovered Bertrand, who became Constable of France. The move did not turn out badly, as Bertrand was crucial to finally give victory to Henry of Trastamara, as well as to change the balance of forces in the 100 Years' War. And finally, we come to the top one on the list of craziest rescues of the Middle Ages. You can probably guess who occupies it, since his ransom was the most expensive of all, Richard the Lionheart. The famous English king is known for leading the Third Crusade to Jerusalem, in which he even managed to defeat Saladin in the open field. Richard did not manage to regain Jerusalem, as the many problems that threatened his kingdom forced him to abandon the crusade in 1192. However, his adventures did not end there. After suffering a terrible storm, Richard had to continue his return journey overland, being forced to cross the domains of some of his enemies. Still using disguises, Richard was finally taken prisoner by Emperor Henry VI of Germany, who imprisoned the legendary king in Dürstein Castle, still hanging over the Danube today. It was there that Richard composed his famous song, Je nous en prie. According to legend, King Richard was rescued by a troubadour, his childhood friend named Blondel de Nesle, who would go singing a song at the foot of each castle until he found Richard, with whom he would have composed that melody years before. But the truth is that it was his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who did the impossible to satisfy the king's incredible ransom, 100,000 marks, or 5 times the annual income of the English crown at the time. To recover the king, the English had to pay terrible taxes, the churches had to donate their treasures, and the nobles had to compensate with money for not fulfilling some of their feudal obligations. And that was not all. To further complicate the situation, Richard's brother, John Landless, interested in the king's non-return, offered the emperor 80,000 marks in exchange for keeping Richard prisoner. What a deal the English had with the Lionheart. And this is the end of the video, like a great night at the theatre introducing the main protagonists. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment about what other character, battle, event, or historical curiosity you would like us to cover. I hope you enjoyed the video as much as we did. See you in a few days. Bye!